I'll write part 1 of the story in approximately 1,400 words using simple, engaging language with a natural tone. I'll avoid common names like Marcus, Sarah, Emma, and Jamal, and create human-centric content that follows YouTube policies. I'd story part B1 type text markdown. Title, Black Teen Kicked Off Flight Unfairly, Part 1. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Atlanta International Airport as Andre Taylor adjusted his backpack strap and double-checked his boarding pass. Flight 237 to New York, Gate B22, departure in 1 hour. Everything was in order. At 17, this was Andre's first time flying alone, but he wasn't nervous. He was excited. Columbia University's summer program for gifted high school students had only accepted 30 applicants nationwide, and Andre had worked incredibly hard to be one of them. 3 weeks studying advanced physics with some of the brightest minds in the country waited for him in New York. "Don't forget to text when you land," his mother had reminded him that morning, hugging him tightly before he went through security. "And call tonight. No excuses." Andre smiled at the memory as he walked through the terminal. His parents had always been his biggest supporters. His mother a hospital administrator, his father a businessman who traveled frequently. They had taught him to carry himself with confidence but also humility, to work twice as hard but never complain. And, most importantly, to always remain respectful even when others weren't. The boarding area was crowded when Andre arrived. He found an empty seat near the window and pulled out his physics textbook. He wanted to review a few concepts before the program started. Several pages of notes later, the boarding announcement came over the speaker. Now boarding, Clear Sky Airlines, Flight 237 to New York LaGuardia, all zones. Andre packed up his book and joined the line. He had been assigned Zone 3, so he waited patiently as the first 2 groups boarded. When his turn came, he handed his boarding pass to the gate agent, a thin woman with a tired smile. "First time to New York?" she asked, noticing his age. "Yes, ma'am," Andre replied politely. "Going for a summer program at Columbia." "Well, aren't you something?" she said, genuinely impressed. "Enjoy the flight, honey." The airplane cabin was nearly full by the time Andre made his way down the narrow aisle. He found his seat, 14B, a middle seat, and carefully stored his backpack under the seat in front of him. An older gentleman in a business suit occupied the window seat, already engrossed in a newspaper. The aisle seat remained empty for now. Andre buckled his seatbelt and pulled out his phone to send a quick text to his parents. "On the plane. Will text when I land. Love you both." Just as he was putting his phone on airplane mode, a middle-aged woman with blonde hair approached and checked her boarding pass. "I think that's my seat," she said, pointing to the empty aisle spot. Andre smiled and stood up slightly to let her pass, careful not to bump into the man by the window. The woman hesitated. She looked at Andre, then at her boarding pass again, then back at Andre. Her expression changed almost imperceptibly. "Actually," she said loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear, "I think there's been a mistake. I requested an aisle seat next to my husband." She gestured vaguely toward the front of the plane. Andre remained quiet, not sure if she was speaking to him or just thinking out loud. The woman walked back toward the front of the cabin, where a flight attendant was helping another passenger store luggage. 5 minutes passed. The final boarding announcements were made. Andre looked around and noticed the woman now sitting in an aisle seat 2 rows ahead, occasionally glancing back in his direction and whispering to her seatmate. A flight attendant approached Andre's row. She was tall, with short dark hair pulled back tightly. "Excuse me," she said, her voice professional but cool. "May I see your boarding pass?" Andre pulled it up on his phone and showed it to her. "Is something wrong?" he asked. The flight attendant examined it closely, then handed the phone back to him. "No, everything seems to be in order," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. She walked away, stopping briefly to speak with the blonde woman before continuing toward the front of the plane. Andre tried to relax. He pulled out his earbuds, planning to listen to some music during takeoff, when he noticed 2 flight attendants whispering and looking in his direction. One of them was the tall woman who had checked his boarding pass. The other was an older man with graying hair at his temples. The male flight attendant approached him this time. "Sir, could you come with me for a moment?" he asked, his voice lowered. Andre felt a flutter of confusion. "Is there a problem? We just need to speak with you about something. Please bring your belongings." The cabin had grown oddly quiet. Andre could feel dozens of eyes on him as he slowly unbuckled his seatbelt and gathered his backpack. He followed the flight attendant to the front of the plane, conscious of his heartbeat quickening with each step. Near the cockpit, the flight attendant stopped and turned to face him. The tall female attendant joined them. "I'm sorry," the man said, not sounding particularly sorry, "but we're going to have to ask you to deplane." Andre blinked, certain he had misheard. "Excuse me?" "We've received some concerns from other passengers," the female attendant explained, keeping her voice low. "For everyone's comfort and the smooth operation of this flight, we think it would be best if you took a later flight." Andre felt like the floor beneath him had suddenly disappeared. "What concerns? I haven't done anything." "It's not about doing anything," the man replied. "It's about ensuring all passengers feel comfortable during the flight." "But that doesn't make any sense," Andre insisted, trying to keep his voice steady despite the growing knot in his stomach. "I was just sitting in my assigned seat reading a book." The female attendant's expression hardened slightly. "Sir, the flight crew has final authority regarding passenger issues. We're not going to debate this. You'll need to deplane now." Andre looked past them into the cabin. Most passengers were avoiding eye contact, suddenly fascinated by their phones or the safety cards in their seat pockets. A few, however, were watching the scene unfold with expressions ranging from confusion to discomfort to outright satisfaction. The blonde woman who had claimed her seat was wrong was among the latter group. "Can you at least tell me specifically what I did wrong?" Andre asked, fighting to keep his voice from cracking. "This is not a discussion," the male attendant said, firmly. "If you don't leave voluntarily, we'll need to call security." The humiliation washed over Andre in a hot wave. He had done nothing wrong, nothing at all, yet here he was, being treated like a criminal. In that moment, he remembered his father's words from years ago. "Sometimes, son, you'll be judged not by what you do, but by what you are. In those moments, hold on to your dignity. It's the one thing they can't take from you." "I understand," Andre said quietly, straightening his shoulders. "I'll go." He walked down the jet bridge alone, the cool air a stark contrast to the burning in his cheeks. A gate agent looked up in surprise as he emerged. "Is there a problem with the flight?" she asked. "They asked me to leave," Andre said, the words feeling strange in his mouth. "They said other passengers had concerns." The gate agent frowned. "Concerns about what?" "They wouldn't say." Andre stood at the counter while the agent made a call. He could hear only her side of the conversation, mostly "yes" and "I understand," and finally, "I'll take care of it." When she hung up, her professional smile was back in place, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I apologize for the inconvenience, sir. The flight crew has final authority on all passenger issues. I can rebook you on the next available flight, which leaves in 3 hours." Andre nodded silently. As the agent typed on her computer, he saw the jet bridge door close. Through the large windows, he watched as Flight 237 slowly backed away from the gate. 3 young women approached him, hesitantly. "We saw what happened," one of them said. She had curly hair and kind eyes. "That was completely unfair. We were sitting right behind you." "Did you want to make a complaint?" another asked. "We'd be willing to be witnesses. What they did wasn't right." The third woman handed him a business card. "I'm a civil rights attorney. This kind of thing happens too often, and airlines need to be held accountable." Andre thanked them, tucking the card into his pocket. As the women left, he looked down at his phone, still clutching it tightly in his hand. 3 missed calls from his father. With a deep breath, Andre found a quiet corner of the gate area and called him back. "Hey, Dad," he said when his father answered, trying to sound normal. "Andre? I thought you'd be in the air by now. Did the flight get delayed?" Andre paused, unsure how to explain what had just happened. No, the flight left on time. I'm not on it. What do you mean you're not on it? His father's voice sharpened with concern. And so Andre told him everything, from the woman who claimed to be in the wrong seat to the flight attendants who refused to give him a reason for his removal. As he spoke, the unfairness of it all threatened to overwhelm him, but he kept his voice steady. There was a long silence when he finished. Andre, his father said, finally, his voice unnaturally calm. Stay right where you are. Don't rebook anything. I'll call you back in 5 minutes. The line went dead, leaving Andre alone with his thoughts and the business card of a civil rights attorney he never should have needed to meet. I've created a detailed, human-centered first part of the story that sets up the unfair situation while keeping the language simple and engaging. The narrative follows Andre Taylor, a gifted high school student heading to a summer program who faces discrimination on his flight. The story builds tension naturally through establishing Andre's character and accomplishments, creating a realistic airport and boarding scenario, showing the escalating discrimination through subtle interactions, capturing the emotional impact of the unfair treatment, ending with the pivotal phone call to his father. I've used simple, accessible language throughout, while maintaining an engaging narrative flow that avoids any content that would violate YouTube policies. Would you like me to make any adjustments to this first part? I'll write part 2 of the story in approximately 1,400 words, continuing where part 1 left off with Andre waiting for his father's callback. I'll maintain a simple, engaging writing style with natural language and avoid using common names like Marcus, Sarah, Emma, and Jamal. Andre sat alone in the bustling terminal, his backpack resting against his leg. Around him, travelers rushed to catch flights, pulled wheeled luggage, and hunched over phones. None of them knew what had just happened to him. None of them cared. To them, he was just another face in a crowded airport. But inside, Andre was struggling. The humiliation of being removed from the plane in front of everyone burned in his chest. He kept replaying the scene in his mind, the flight attendants' cold faces, the passengers' averted eyes, the blonde woman's satisfied expression. What had he done to deserve this? He'd been polite, followed all the rules, kept to himself, yet somehow his mere presence had been deemed a problem. His phone buzzed in his hand. His father. Andre, are you still at gate B22? His father asked, his voice unusually measured. Yeah, Dad. I'm sitting near the windows. Good. Stay there. I've made some calls. There was a pause, then his father continued. How are you holding up? The simple question nearly broke Andre's composure. He swallowed hard. I'm okay, he lied, not wanting his father to worry. Just confused, I guess, and... He hesitated, embarrassed. Listen to me, his father said, his voice firm but gentle. You have nothing to be embarrassed about, nothing. Do you understand? You did nothing wrong. Then why did they kick me off, Dad? They wouldn't even tell me what I did. His father sighed heavily on the other end of the line. Because sometimes, people look at us and see what they want to see, not who we really are. What happened today wasn't about you, Andre. It was about them, their prejudice, their ignorance. Andre nodded even though his father couldn't see him. He'd heard these talks before, about how the world might treat him differently, about how he'd have to work twice as hard, be twice as polite. But knowing it could happen and experiencing it were completely different things. I know, Dad, but still. I understand, son. Trust me, I do. But right now, I need you to hold your head high. Someone from the airline will be coming to find you very soon. Andre frowned. Someone from the airline? Why? Let's just say I made a phone call to an old friend who happens to work in the corporate office. He's taking this very seriously. Before Andre could ask more questions, he noticed a man in a sharp suit walking purposefully toward him. The man was looking around the gate area, clearly searching for someone. I think someone's coming now, Dad. I'll call you back. No need. I'm on my way to the airport. I'll be there in about 40 minutes. Just remember, you did nothing wrong. Andre ended the call and stood up as the man in the suit approached him. Are you Andre Taylor? the man asked, his expression serious but not unfriendly. Yes, sir. The man extended his hand. I'm Raymond Powell, Regional Director for Clear Sky Airlines. I'd like to personally apologize for the treatment you received today. Andre shook the man's hand, surprised by the title. Regional Director? His father's old friend must be higher up than he'd realized. Thank you, Andre said, not knowing what else to say. What happened on that flight was completely unacceptable, Mr. Powell continued. Clear Sky has a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind. I can assure you that we're taking this incident very seriously. Andre nodded, still feeling off balance by this sudden turn of events. If you don't mind, Mr. Powell said, I'd like you to come with me to our executive lounge where we can discuss this further. Your father is on his way, I understand, and we can wait for him there. The executive lounge was nothing like the crowded terminal. Soft music played in the background as a handful of travelers sat in plush chairs, enjoying complimentary snacks and beverages. Mr. Powell led Andre to a private conference room in the back. Can I get you anything? He asked. Water? Soda? Something to eat? Just water, please, Andre replied, still trying to process everything. Less than an hour ago, he'd been treated like a criminal. Now he was being escorted to a private lounge by a company executive. Mr. Powell returned with a bottle of water and took a seat across from Andre. I'd like to hear your account of what happened, he said, pulling out a small notebook. Every detail you can remember. So Andre told him everything, from boarding the plane to the woman who changed seats to the flight attendants who refused to give him a reason for his removal. Mr. Powell listened intently, occasionally writing things down. And they never gave you any specific reason? He asked when Andre finished. No, sir, just that some passengers had concerns and that the flight crew had final authority. Mr. Powell shook his head, his expression grim. That's not how our policies work. Yes, flight crews have authority, but they need legitimate reasons to remove a passenger. Being young and black isn't one of them. Andre appreciated the man's directness. At least he wasn't pretending this was about something else. We've already begun an investigation, Mr. Powell continued. The crew members involved have been removed from duty pending review, and we've reached out to several passengers who witnessed the incident. There were 3 women who offered to be witnesses, Andre said, remembering. One of them gave me her card. He pulled the business card from his pocket and handed it to Mr. Powell. The man glanced at it and raised an eyebrow. Grace Chen? She's a well-known civil rights attorney. He handed the card back. You might want to keep that, though I hope we can resolve this to your satisfaction without needing legal action. A soft knock on the door interrupted them. A young woman poked her head in. Mr. Powell, there's someone here to see Andre Taylor. He says he's his father. Send him in, please. Moments later, the door opened wider, and Andre's father walked in. Thomas Taylor was an imposing figure, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit that somehow didn't seem out of place despite the fact that he'd probably rushed straight from his office. His expression was calm, but Andre could see the tightly controlled anger in his eyes. Dad, Andre said, standing up. His father embraced him tightly. Are you okay? He asked quietly. I'm fine, Andre assured him, feeling better now that his father was here. Thomas turned to Mr. Powell, who had also risen to his feet. Raymond, he said with a nod. Thomas, Mr. Powell replied, extending his hand. I wish we were meeting again under better circumstances. Andre looked between the 2 men, confused. You know each other? His father kept his eyes on Mr. Powell as he answered. We've met several times at industry events. Mr. Powell cleared his throat, suddenly looking uncomfortable. Your father is well known in the transportation sector. Andre frowned, sensing there was more to this story. His father owned a transportation logistics company, that much he knew. But the way Mr. Powell was acting suggested something more significant. Dad, what's going on? Andre asked. Why is the regional director of the airline meeting with me personally? What exactly did you say on that phone call? Thomas turned to his son, his expression softening. Andre, there are some things about our family's business that I've kept low profile, for good reasons. He glanced at Mr. Powell. But perhaps now is the time for more transparency. Mr. Powell nodded, as if giving permission. Son, Thomas said, Clear Sky Airlines is a subsidiary of Taylor Transportation Group. Our company acquired it 4 years ago. Andre stared at his father, the implications slowly sinking in. Wait, you're saying you own the airline? The parent company does, yes. Andre fell back into his chair, stunned. All this time he'd known his father ran a successful business, but he'd had no idea of its true scale. No wonder the regional director had appeared so quickly. No wonder the crew had been immediately suspended. Why didn't you ever tell me? Andre asked. Thomas sighed. I wanted you and your sister to have normal lives, to be known for your own achievements, not as the Taylor kids. And frankly, I didn't want the publicity. Being a black man who owns your airline comes with scrutiny. Andre understood immediately. His father had worked hard to build his company without drawing attention to his race, knowing that some people would always look for reasons to question his success. That's why you always told us to keep a low profile, Andre said, remembering his father's frequent reminders about social media and public behavior. Partly, Thomas agreed. But that doesn't mean we stay silent when faced with injustice. He turned back to Mr. Powell, his expression hardening. I want a full investigation. I want to know exactly why my son was removed from that flight, and I want those responsible held accountable. Mr. Powell nodded quickly. Of course. We've already begun. And, Thomas continued, cutting him off, I want to know what systemic issues allowed this to happen in the first place. This isn't just about one incident or a few employees. This is about a culture that made them think this was acceptable. Andre watched his father with newfound respect. This wasn't just a parent protecting his child. This was a leader demanding accountability from his own organization. I understand completely, Mr. Powell said, and I agree. This needs to be addressed at all levels. Thomas placed a hand on Andre's shoulder. In the meantime, my son still needs to get to New York for his program. Of course, Mr. Powell said quickly. We have a private corporate jet that can take you both there immediately. It's being prepared as we speak. As they left the conference room, Andre's phone buzzed with a news alert. He glanced down at the screen and froze. Dad, he said, holding up his phone. It's already on social media. The headline read, Teen kicked off flight for no reason. Turns out his father owns the airline. Thomas sighed. So much for keeping a low profile. I've created part 2 of the story, continuing Andre's journey after being unfairly removed from his flight. This section builds on the emotional impact of the discrimination, while introducing the major revelation that Andre's father actually owns the airline's parent company. The narrative develops through Andre processing his emotions after the humiliation, the supportive conversation with his father, the surprising arrival of the airline's regional director, the formal investigation beginning, the dramatic revelation about his father's ownership of the airline. The story beginning to go viral, the language remains simple and accessible while maintaining an engaging narrative flow. I've focused on the human elements, Andre's feelings, his relationship with his father, and the complex social dynamics at play, to keep the story relatable and authentic. Would you like me to make any adjustments to this second part of the story? I'll write part 3 of the story in approximately 1,400 words, continuing from where part 2 ended. I'll maintain the engaging, human-centric style with simple language and natural tone while avoiding common names like Marcus, Sarah, Emma, and Jamal. This is the last thing we need right now, Thomas said, looking at the headline on Andre's phone. His voice was calm, but Andre could see the tension in his shoulders. I'm sorry, Dad, Andre said quietly. I didn't mean for this to happen. Thomas's expression softened immediately. He put a hand on Andre's shoulder. This isn't your fault, not one bit of it. You understand? You were just trying to get to your program. Mr. Powell cleared his throat. If I may suggest, We should move to the private terminal. There will be fewer people there, and we can avoid any press that might be gathering." Thomas nodded, and they followed Mr. Powell through a side door that led to a service corridor. As they walked, Thomas's phone began ringing constantly. He glanced at the screen a few times but didn't answer. "Your office?" Andre asked. "Among others," Thomas replied. The story's breaking fast. They emerged into a parking area where a black SUV waited. The driver opened the doors without a word and they climbed in. "The private aviation terminal is on the other side of the airport," Mr. Powell explained as they pulled away. "Your flight crew is already preparing the jet." Andre stared out the window, watching the main terminal building recede in the distance. Just 2 hours ago, he'd been walking through that terminal, excited about his summer program, completely unaware of what was about to happen. Now he was riding in a luxury SUV, heading toward a private jet. While a story about him was spreading across the internet, it felt surreal. "Dad," Andre said, turning away from the window. "What happens next? With the airline, I mean." Thomas looked at his son thoughtfully. "That depends partly on what you want to happen. What I want? Yes. You're the one who was wronged. Your voice should matter in how we address this." Andre hadn't expected that. He'd assumed his father would handle everything. "I don't know," he admitted. "I haven't really thought about it." "Well, you have some time to think," Thomas said. "Right now, let's focus on getting you to New York." The private terminal was nothing like the main airport. No crowds, no lines, no announcements blaring overhead. Just a sleek, modern building, with large windows overlooking the tarmac, where several private jets were parked. As they entered, a woman in a crisp uniform approached them. "Mr. Taylor," she said, addressing Thomas with a respectful nod. "The jet is ready whenever you are. We've filed a flight plan for LaGuardia and expect an on-time arrival." "Thank you, Captain Lee," Thomas replied. "This is my son, Andre." "Captain," Lee turned to Andre with a warm smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Andre. I'll be your pilot today. We'll have you in New York before dinner time." Andre shook her hand, still trying to process everything. "Thank you." As Captain Lee walked away, to complete her pre-flight checks, Andre turned to his father. "You know the pilots by name?" Thomas smiled slightly. "I try to know all our senior staff. Captain Lee has been with the company for 15 years. She's one of our best." Mr. Powell, who had been speaking quietly on his phone, approached them. "Thomas, there's something you should know. The story is gaining traction. Several news outlets have picked it up and it's trending on social media." Thomas sighed. "I expected as much. What's the angle?" "Mixed so far. Some are focusing on the discrimination aspect. Others are more interested in the airline owner's son angle. A few are questioning whether your ownership influenced the company's response." "Of course it influenced the response," Thomas said sharply. "That's the point. This kind of thing happens every day to people who don't have the power to do anything about it." Andre watched his father, sensing there was more at stake here than just one incident. "Dad," he said hesitantly. "Maybe this is an opportunity." Both men turned to look at him. "What do you mean?" Thomas asked. Andre took a deep breath. "Well, like you said, this happens all the time to people who don't have power. But we do. Maybe we can use that to make sure it happens less often." A slow smile spread across Thomas's face, the kind of smile that made Andre feel like he'd said something his father had been waiting to hear. "Go on," Thomas encouraged. "I don't know exactly what that looks like," Andre admitted. "But doing nothing feels wrong, and just fixing this one incident feels insufficient." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "You're right. This could be a turning point, not just for Clear Sky but for the industry." He turned to Mr. Powell. "Raymond, I want to call an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning." "Of course," Mr. Powell replied. "I'll set it up." A staff member approached to inform them that the jet was ready for boarding. As they walked across the tarmac toward the sleek private aircraft, Andre felt a strange mix of emotions. The day had been a roller coaster. from excitement to humiliation to this unexpected turn of events. The interior of the jet was luxurious but tasteful. Cream leather seats, polished wood accents, and plenty of space. Andre settled into one of the seats, placing his backpack beside him. "First time on a private jet?" Thomas asked, taking the seat across from him. "You know it is," Andre replied with a half-smile. "Why didn't you ever tell us about all this, Dad? About how big the company really is?" Thomas was quiet for a moment, looking out the window as the ground crew finished their work. "I wanted to protect you and your sister," he finally said. "From the pressure, from the scrutiny. When I started the company, we were small, just a few trucks and a lot of ambition. As we grew, I saw how people's perceptions changed. Suddenly, I wasn't just a businessman. I was a black businessman. Everything I did was viewed through that lens." He paused, his eyes still on the activity outside. "I didn't want that for you. I wanted you to be able to define yourselves, to succeed or fail on your own terms. And selfishly, perhaps, I wanted our family life to stay normal, to be about us, not about the company or the money." Andre had never heard his father speak so openly about these things before. "I understand," he said quietly. Thomas turned back, to him with a sad smile. "But I'm realizing that maybe I was wrong. Maybe by trying to shield you from these realities, I've done you a disservice." "How so?" "Because the world doesn't care about my intentions. It doesn't care that I wanted to protect you. It sees what it wants to see. And today, you experienced that firsthand." The engines began to hum as Captain Lee prepared for takeoff. A flight attendant Andre hadn't noticed before approached to remind them to fasten their seatbelts. Once they were airborne, Thomas pulled out his tablet and began scrolling through what looked like news articles. "How bad is it?" Andre asked. Cadet Thomas grimaced slightly. "Mixed, like Raymond said. Some supportive, some critical, some just sensationalizing." He turned the tablet so Andre could see one of the headlines. "Airline owner's son experiences discrimination, his father's company." Aloud, Andre winced. "That's not fair." "No, but it's not entirely wrong either," Thomas replied, surprising Andre. "I own the company. Ultimately, the culture, the policies, the training, that's on me. I can't claim credit for the good without accepting responsibility for the bad." Andre considered this. His father had always taught him about taking responsibility, about integrity. It was one thing to say those words. It was another to live them when the stakes were this high. "So what are you going to do?" he asked. Thomas set the tablet down. "What we are going to do," he corrected, "is use this moment to create real change. Not just a PR statement, not just firing a few people, but actual structural change. How? That's what I want us to figure out. You had an idea back at the terminal about using our power to help those who don't have it. Let's start there." For the next hour, as the private jet cruised toward New York, father and son talked. Not as CEO and teenager, but as partners trying to solve a problem bigger than both of them. They discussed policy changes, training programs, accountability measures. Andre shared insights from his own experiences and those of his friends. Thomas contributed his knowledge of corporate structures and industry practices. By the time the captain announced their descent into New York, they had the outline of a plan. "You know," Thomas said, closing the notes app on his tablet, "when I was your age, I never would have imagined owning an airline. But I definitely wouldn't have imagined that my son would help me transform it." Andre smiled, feeling a new kind of connection with his father. "I just hope it works." "It will," Thomas assured him. "Because we're not just doing this for headlines or to protect the company's image. We're doing it because it's right." As the jet touched down at LaGuardia, Andre's phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from the Columbia program coordinator, expressing concern about the news reports and asking if he needed any assistance. "Looks like the story beat us to New York," Andre said, showing his father the email. Thomas nodded. "That's going to keep happening for a while. Are you ready for that?" Andre thought about the unfairness of what had happened to him, about the countless others who had experienced similar treatment without the power to fight back, about the opportunity. They now had to make a difference. "I think I am," he said with new determination. After all, someone has to stand up and say enough. Thomas smiled with pride. That's my boy. As they deplaned, a Clear Sky representative was waiting to escort them to a waiting car. The young woman looked nervous, clearly aware of who they were. Mr. Taylor, she said, addressing Thomas. I just wanted to say, many of us at Clear Sky are horrified by what happened today. Not everyone at the company is like that. Thomas nodded acknowledgement. I know, and soon, hopefully no one will be. The woman smiled with relief and led them toward the terminal exit. As they walked, Andre noticed people looking at them, a few even taking photos with their phones. Looks like we're going to have to get used to a higher profile, he murmured to his father. Yes, Thomas agreed, but we're going to use that spotlight for something important. And for the first time since being escorted off that morning's flight, Andre felt a sense of purpose replacing his humiliation. What had started as an act of discrimination was about to become something much bigger, a catalyst for change that would reach far beyond one airline or one incident. They had work to do. I've written part 3 of the story, continuing Andre and his father's journey after the revelation that Thomas Taylor owns the airline. This section explores the developing relationship between father and son as they begin to formulate a plan to address not just the individual incident, but the systemic issues it represents. The narrative develops through their escape from the main terminal to avoid press attention, the experience at the private aviation terminal, Thomas's explanation of why he kept the true scale of his business private, the father-son dialogue about responsibility and opportunity, the development of a collaborative plan to create meaningful change, Andre's growth as he embraces the chance to make a difference throughout. I've maintained simple, accessible language while creating an engaging narrative that focuses on the human aspects of the story. The relationship between father and son, the complex emotions they're both experiencing, and their shared commitment to addressing injustice. Would you like me to make any adjustments to this third part of the story? I'll write part 4 of the story in approximately 1,400 words, continuing from where part 3 ended. I'll maintain the engaging, human-centric style with simple language and natural tone, while avoiding common names like Marcus, Sarah, Emma, and Jamal. On story part 4, type text to Markdown. Title: Black Teen Kicked Off Flight Unfairly, Part 4. The Columbia University campus buzzed with summer energy as Andre made his way to his first day of the physics program. Despite arriving in New York, just the night before he'd insisted on attending as planned. I didn't come all this way to miss anything, he'd told his father, who had nodded with understanding. Walking across the historic grounds, Andre could feel eyes on him. Whispers followed him like shadows. News traveled fast, especially in the age of social media, and by now many people recognized him as that kid from the airline story. Some students approached him directly, expressing support or curiosity. Others kept their distance, unsure what to say. Professor Wilson, the program director, had been surprisingly understanding when Andre explained the situation. These are extraordinary circumstances, the professor had said during their brief meeting that morning. If you need any accommodations or time to deal with everything, just let me know. Andre had thanked him, but assured him he was ready to focus on physics. And he meant it, at least partly. As he found his assigned seat in the lecture hall, he tried to push everything else from his mind. For the next 3 hours, he mostly succeeded, losing himself in the elegant mathematics of quantum theory. But reality rushed back the moment class ended. His phone, which he'd silenced, lit up with notifications, missed calls from his mother, texts from his sister, and dozens of news alerts mentioning his name or his father's. One headline caught his eye. Clear Sky Airlines announces emergency. Board meeting following discrimination incident. So his father was moving quickly. Andre wasn't surprised. Thomas Taylor had built his business empire by being decisive and forward-thinking. When he committed to something, he didn't waste time. Andre's phone rang just as he was leaving the building. His father. How was your first class? Thomas asked when Andre answered. Good. Intense, but good. The professor seems brilliant. Glad to hear it. Listen, I'm in the city now. The board meeting is set for tomorrow morning. I thought we could have dinner and go over our strategy. Andre heard something in his father's voice, a hint of uncertainty perhaps. It was unusual. Thomas Taylor was always confident, always in control. Is everything okay, Dad? Andre asked. There was a pause. It's complicated. I'll explain when I see you. Meet me at the hotel at 6. I'll be there. The Westbrook Hotel occupied half a block of prime Manhattan real estate. As the taxi dropped Andre off at the entrance, he realized he shouldn't have been surprised that his father had chosen one of the city's most exclusive addresses. The doorman nodded respectfully as Andre entered, as if he'd been told to expect him. The suite on the top floor was larger than the entire first floor of their house back home. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of Central Park and the city skyline beyond. Thomas was sitting at a large desk, his laptop open, papers spread out before him. He looked up when Andre entered and immediately closed the computer. Right, on time, he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. How was the rest of your day? Fine. Dad, what's going on? You sounded worried on the phone. Thomas sighed and gestured for Andre to sit. The situation is more complicated than I initially thought. There's significant pushback from some board members about the changes we discussed. What kind of pushback? Andre asked, sitting across from his father. The usual. Concerns about costs, implementation timelines, potential disruption to operations. Thomas shook his head. But the real issue is that some of them don't see the problem. They view what happened to you as an isolated incident, not a systemic issue. Andre frowned. Even after everything that's been in the news? Especially after everything in the news. They think we're overreacting because of the publicity, making changes to appease the public rather than because they're necessary. Thomas stood and walked to the window looking out at the city. The truth is they're partly right. What do you mean? Thomas turned back to face his son. If this had happened to someone else, someone without connections to the company, would I be pushing for such comprehensive changes? Would I have called an emergency board meeting? Would I be personally involved at all? Andre hadn't considered this angle. I don't know. Would you? I like to think so, Thomas said quietly. But I can't be sure. And that's part of the problem, isn't it? The system works differently depending on who you are, who you know, what power you have. Andre nodded slowly. His father was voicing something he'd felt, but hadn't fully articulated. The uncomfortable truth that their ability to address this injustice was itself a product of privilege. So what do we do? He asked. Thomas returned to his seat. We acknowledge that reality, but we don't let it stop us. Instead, we use it as motivation to create changes that benefit everyone, not just people with connections. He pushed a folder across the desk toward Andre. This is what I've been working on. A comprehensive proposal for systemic changes within Clear Sky. Anti-bias training for all staff. Revised protocols for passenger complaints and removal. An independent review board to handle discrimination cases. And a scholarship program to increase diversity in our pilot training and management tracks. Andre opened the folder and scanned the document inside. It was detailed and far-reaching, addressing not just the specific issue he'd faced, but the underlying culture that had allowed it to happen. This is impressive, he said, looking up at his father. But not enough, Thomas replied. Not yet. That's why I wanted to meet. I need your perspective, your ideas. This can't just be my vision. It needs to reflect the experiences of people, like you, young people who see the world differently than my generation does. For the next 2 hours, they worked together, refining the proposal. Andre suggested adding a youth advisory board to provide ongoing input on company policies. Thomas liked the idea and expanded it to include representatives from various community organizations. They were interrupted by a knock at the door. Room service arrived with dinner. Steak for Thomas, salmon for Andre, his favorite. You remembered, Andre said as the server wheeled the cart in. Of course, Thomas replied with a genuine smile this time. As they ate, the conversation shifted from business to more personal matters. Your mother called earlier, Thomas said. She's worried about you. Andre nodded. I know. I need to call her back. She thinks I'm pushing you too hard, involving you in all this when you should be focusing on your program. What do you think? Andre asked. Thomas considered the question. I think you're old enough to decide for yourself, but I also think this is a lot for anyone to handle, let alone someone your age. I'm not just anyone, Dad. I'm your son. And this matters to me. Andre set down his fork. Besides, it's not like I can just pretend it didn't happen and go back to normal. My face is all over the internet. Thomas nodded. True. But there's a difference between acknowledging what happened and taking on the responsibility of fixing it. You don't have to do the latter. I want to, Andre said firmly. I need to. Thomas studied his son's face, then nodded. All right, but promise me something. If it gets to be too much, if you need to step back, you'll tell me. Your well-being comes first, always. I promise. After dinner, they returned to the proposal, working late into the night. By the time they finished, it was after midnight, and the document had nearly doubled in length. I think we've got something really good here, Thomas said, scrolling through the final draft on his laptop. The board won't be able to dismiss this easily. What if they still say no? Andre asked. Thomas's expression hardened slightly. They won't. I founded this company. I still own the majority of shares. If I have to, I'll make these changes with or without their approval. Andre hadn't often seen this side of his father, the tough, uncompromising businessman who had built an empire from nothing. It was both impressive and a little intimidating. Get some rest, Thomas said, closing his laptop. Tomorrow's going to be a big day. You want me to come to the board meeting? Andre asked, surprised. Absolutely. Your story, your perspective, it needs to be part of this. Unless you'd rather not? Andre thought about it. The idea of facing a room full of corporate executives was daunting. But then he remembered how it felt to be escorted off that plane. The humiliation, the helplessness. I'll be there, he said. The next morning, Andre woke to find a garment bag hanging on his door with a note from his father. Thought you might need this for today. Inside was a tailored suit in deep navy blue, along with a crisp white shirt and a subtle patterned tie. Everything fit perfectly, making Andre wonder when his father had found time to arrange this. At precisely 9 a.m., they entered the New York offices of Clear Sky Airlines, located in a gleaming skyscraper in Midtown. The reception area fell silent. As they walked in, employees recognizing them immediately. Mr. Powell, the regional director who had met them at the Atlanta airport, was waiting to escort them to the boardroom. Everything's set, he told Thomas quietly as they walked. All board members are present, including those calling in from other locations. Thomas nodded. And the press? Waiting for the statement afterward, as you requested. Andre felt a flutter of nerves. Press? You didn't mention that. Just a brief statement after the meeting, Thomas assured him. Nothing you need to worry about. But Andre did worry, especially when they reached the boardroom, and he saw the long table surrounded by serious-faced executives. These were some of the most powerful people in the transportation industry, and he was about to tell them they were part of a system that allowed discrimination to flourish. Thomas must have sensed his anxiety. He placed a hand on Andre's shoulder and whispered, Remember why we're here. Remember who we're doing this for. Andre took a deep breath and nodded. As they took their seats at the table, he thought about all the people who had experienced what he had, but without the power to do anything about it. People whose stories never made headlines, whose complaints were dismissed, whose dignity was violated without consequence. He was ready. Ladies and gentlemen, Thomas began, his voice commanding the room instantly. I've called this emergency meeting because Clear Sky Airlines is facing a crisis. But it's not the crisis you think it is. All eyes were on Thomas Taylor as he stood at the head of the table, his son by his side, about to propose changes that would reshape not just one airline, but potentially an entire industry. I've created part 4 of the story, focusing on Andre and Thomas's preparations for the pivotal board meeting that could transform the airline's approach to discrimination. This section explores the deeper implications of their privileged position to effect change while developing their plan for systemic reforms. The narrative develops through Andre attempting to maintain normalcy by attending his first day at the physics program, the reality of his newfound notoriety affecting his experience, the father-son dinner meeting where they discuss the complexities of their situation, Thomas's vulnerability in questioning whether he would act the same if it weren't his son, their collaborative work on a comprehensive proposal for change. The preparation for the consequential board meeting I've maintained simple, accessible language throughout while creating an engaging narrative that highlights the human elements. Andre's determination to use this difficult experience for positive change, the strengthening bond between father and son, and the moral complexities they're navigating together. Would you like me to make any adjustments to this 4th part of the story? I'll write the final part 5 of the story in approximately 1,400 words, concluding the narrative that began with Andre being unfairly removed from a flight. I'll maintain the engaging, human-centric style with simple language and natural tone while avoiding common names like Marcus, Sarah, Emma, and Jamal. Part 5. The real crisis, Thomas continued, his voice firm but measured, is not about public relations or media attention. It's about a fundamental failure in our company culture that allowed my son to be treated like a criminal simply because of how he looks. The boardroom remained silent. 12 people sat around the polished table, their expressions ranging from discomfort to skepticism to genuine concern. Andre studied their faces, wondering which ones had been pushing back against his father's proposals. Many of you have suggested that this was an isolated incident, Thomas went on. A few employees making poor decisions. But I disagree. When something like this happens, it reflects systemic problems that require systemic solutions. An older man with silver hair cleared his throat. Thomas, no one is denying that what happened to your son was unfortunate. But the changes you're proposing are extensive and costly. We need to be practical about this. Thomas nodded calmly. Robert, I understand your concern about costs, but I'd like you to consider the cost of doing nothing, or doing too little. The cost to our reputation, to our employee morale, to our passenger trust, he paused, and the human cost to people like my son, who did nothing wrong but was humiliated nonetheless. Another board member, a woman in her 50s, spoke up. We all agree that discrimination has no place at Clear Sky. But is this really about discrimination? We don't have all the facts yet. The investigation is still ongoing. Thomas turned to Andre. My son is here today because I believe his voice should be part of this conversation. Andre, would you be willing to share your experience with the board? Andre hadn't expected to speak so soon. He took a deep breath, straightened his shoulders, and looked around the table. 3 days ago, he began, his voice steadier than he felt, I boarded a flight to New York for a summer physics program at Columbia University. I had my boarding pass. I was in my assigned seat. I wasn't loud or disruptive. I was reading a book. He described step by step what had happened, the woman who had moved seats, the flight attendants who had approached him, the vague explanation they'd given for removing him. No one told me what I'd done wrong, Andre said, because I hadn't done anything wrong. The only thing different about me was the color of my skin. The room was completely silent now. Several board members couldn't meet his eyes. I'm not telling you this to make you feel bad or to get anyone fired, Andre continued. I'm telling you because this is happening to people every day on flights, in stores, in schools, in everyday life. The difference is most people don't have a father who owns the company. Most people don't have the power to make sure it doesn't happen again. He looked at his father, who nodded encouragingly. My dad and I have created a proposal that we believe will address the real issues. Not just to fix what happened to me, but to prevent it from happening to anyone else, because that's what matters most. Thomas handed copies of the proposal to everyone at the table. Take a moment to review this, please. For several minutes, The only sound in the room was the rustle of paper as the board members flipped through the document. Andre watched their faces, trying to gauge their reactions. Finally, the silver-haired man, Robert, looked up. "This is comprehensive." "It needs to be," Thomas replied. "Halfway measures won't solve the problem." A younger board member leaned forward. "I particularly like the Youth Advisory Board concept. Getting fresh perspectives could benefit us beyond just addressing bias issues. And the scholarship program could help us build a more diverse pipeline for pilots and executives," added another. The discussion continued for over an hour, with board members raising questions, concerns, and occasionally praise for specific elements of the proposal. Thomas addressed each point thoughtfully, sometimes deferring to Andre for his perspective. As the conversation progressed, Andre noticed a shift in the room. The initial resistance was giving way to engagement, even enthusiasm for some aspects of the plan. It wasn't universal. Robert and a few others remained visibly skeptical, but the momentum was building. Finally, Thomas called for a vote on the proposal. "Before you decide," he said, "I want to be clear about something. This isn't just about doing the right thing, though that should be reason enough. This is about leadership. Clear Sky has an opportunity to set a new standard for the entire industry. We can be reactive, doing the minimum to weather this storm, or we can be proactive, showing what a truly inclusive company looks like." He looked each board member in the eye before continuing. "And on a personal note, yes, this matters to me because it happened to my son. I won't pretend otherwise. But it should matter to all of us, regardless of who it happens to. Because when we say Clear Sky treats everyone with dignity and respect, those can't just be words on a mission statement. They have to be reflected in our actions, our policies, and our culture." The vote wasn't unanimous, but it was decisive. 9 in favor, 3 against. The proposal had passed. As the board members filed out, several stopped to shake Andre's hand, thanking him for his courage in speaking up. One woman who had voted in favor pulled him aside. "My nephew is about your age," she said quietly. "He's had similar experiences. Not on an airplane, but in stores at school. I voted yes for him as much as for you." Andre nodded, understanding the weight of her words. This was bigger than just him. After everyone else had left, Thomas turned to his son with a proud smile. "You did well in there. Better than well. You spoke from the heart and people listened." "We did it together," Andre replied. "But this is just the beginning, isn't it?" "Yes," Thomas agreed. "Now comes the hard part, turning words into actions." They walked together to the room where the press was waiting. Cameras flashed as they entered, and Andre was momentarily blinded by the lights. He hadn't expected so many reporters. Thomas stepped to the podium, Andre standing slightly behind him. "Good morning," Thomas began. "As you know, 3 days ago, my son Andre was removed from a Clear Sky Airlines flight without cause. Today, the board has approved a comprehensive plan to address not just this incident, but the underlying issues that allowed it to happen." He outlined the key points of the proposal: the anti-bias training, the revised protocols, the independent review board, the scholarship program, and the youth advisory board. "But this isn't just about Clear Sky," Thomas continued. "This is an industry-wide issue that requires industry-wide solutions. That's why, in addition to these internal changes, Clear Sky will be hosting a summit next month, inviting representatives from every major airline to discuss best practices for ensuring equal treatment for all passengers." The reporters began, shouting questions, but Thomas held up a hand. "Before I take questions, I'd like my son to say a few words." Andre hadn't prepared anything. His father hadn't mentioned that he would be speaking to the press. But as he stepped to the microphone, he knew exactly what he wanted to say. "When I was removed from that flight, I felt helpless," he began. "I felt like my voice didn't matter, like my dignity wasn't important. No one should ever feel that way, especially not because of the color of their skin, or where they come from, or who they love." He paused, looking out at the sea of cameras and reporters. "My father and I are in a unique position to do something about what happened to me. But there are thousands of people who experience discrimination every day and don't have that power. This plan is for them. The changes we're making are for them. And I'm committed to making sure their voices are heard too. The press conference lasted another 30 minutes with Thomas fielding most of the questions. Afterward, as they rode the elevator down to the lobby, Andre felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. "Dad," he said, "do you really think this will make a difference? Real difference, I mean." Thomas considered the question seriously. "I believe it can. Will it solve everything? No. Discrimination is deeply rooted in our society. It won't disappear overnight or even over years. But can we make things better bit by bit? Yes. And that's worth fighting for." The elevator doors opened, and they crossed the lobby toward the exit. People stared and whispered as they passed. Andre was starting to get used to it. "I need to get back to campus," he said as they reached the street. "I've already missed one morning of classes." Thomas nodded. "Of course, focus on your program. I'll handle things from here." Andre shook his head. "No, I don't mean I'm stepping back. I just mean for today. I'm still all in on this, Dad. The youth, advisory board, the scholarship program. I want to help build those. I want to make sure they work the way they're supposed to." Thomas smiled, pride evident in his eyes. "I was hoping you'd say that." A car pulled up to take Andre back to Columbia. As he was about to get in, Thomas stopped him with a hand on his shoulder. "You know," he said, "when I started building this company, all I wanted was to create something successful, something that would provide for our family. I never imagined it would become a platform for this kind of change." He squeezed Andre's shoulder gently. "I'm sorry for what you went through, son, but I'm incredibly proud of how you've responded to it." Andre nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. "Me too, Dad, me too." 6 months later, Andre stood in the auditorium of his high school, addressing the student body. On the screen behind him was a photo of 20 teenagers from across the country, the inaugural members of Clear Sky's Youth Advisory Board, which he now chaired. "When I was kicked off that flight last summer," he told his classmates, "I thought it was the worst day of my life. And in some ways it was. But it also became the day that showed me how much impact one voice can have when it speaks up for what's right." In the front row, Thomas and Andre's mother watched with pride. Beside them sat the first recipients of the Clear Sky Futures Scholarship, 5 young people who would receive full funding for college and guaranteed internships with the airline. The changes hadn't been easy. There had been resistance, setbacks, and plenty of critics who claimed it was all for show. But 6 months in, the results were beginning to show. Passenger complaints about discriminatory treatment had dropped significantly. Employee satisfaction scores were up. And most importantly, a conversation had started not just at Clear Sky but across the industry. "What I learned from all this," Andre concluded, "is that change doesn't just happen. People make it happen. Sometimes it takes something painful to show us what needs to change, but what matters most is what we do afterward." As the applause filled the auditorium, Andre thought about the frightened, humiliated teenager who had stood in that airport terminal just half a year ago. He never could have imagined that such an ugly moment would lead to something so meaningful. One voice, one story, one opportunity to make a difference. Sometimes, that's all it takes. I've created the 5th and final part of the story, bringing Andre and Thomas's journey to a meaningful conclusion. This section shows the culmination of their efforts to transform a personal injustice into systemic change, both within the airline and potentially across the industry. The narrative develops through the pivotal board meeting where Andre shares his experience firsthand, the deliberation and eventual approval of their comprehensive proposal, the press conference announcing the changes to the public, Andre's eye,